Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Leanna Keyes' play, Dr. Voynich and Her Children, which I'm reading out of the Methuen Drama Book of Trans Plays, which is an excellent collection that you should all purchase. This is a really interesting play set in the near future, a quasi-dystopian, one might say, type future, in which the United States has split between the Heartland and the Coastals, presumably the Coastals being along the east and west coasts, the liberal part of America. And then the Heartland is presumably the middle, the more conservative part of America, generally speaking. Within Heartland, abortion is criminalized. Being LGBT is criminalized. There is police surveillance, heavy police surveillance of people. Medicine is very expensive and difficult to get. Drugs are criminalized, etc., etc. This is essentially the world that the U.S. political right wing wants to build. We follow Rue, who is Dr. Voynich. She is a traveling herbalist with her apprentice, Fade, who, depending on the actor playing Fade, can either be female or non-binary. There's some changes to the dialogue of the play depending on Fade's gender identity. But they are traveling herbalists, and they sell traditional herbal remedies, things that can help people with pain, with respiratory infections, with digestive tract problems, things like this. This is sort of very, very old, ancient, in fact, medical knowledge based in herbs, but not based in pharmaceuticals, because that's criminalized. The only people who can do proper medicine in the sort of contemporary Western conceptualization of that are medtechs, and most people can't afford to go to medtechs. That's a big component, and that's part of the reason why Rue and Fade get such business when they travel to these different towns. Now, they arrive in this particular town. The first thing we get is actually a pre-show content warning, but it's an interestingly done one, because what we have here is stage description, scene description. A large boxy vehicle sits on stage, dusty and warm. In a previous life, it may have been an ambulance. It's covered in flourishing flower boxes, planters, and terrariums, strapped and bolted and welded and nailed on. The side is painted with a fading image of a smiling woman carrying a potted pennyroyal with the words, Dr. Voynich's Herbal Ambulatory, emblazoned in a curly ribbon. A small American flag with no stars dangles from the radio antenna. Fade, an asymmetrical young woman, throws open the back doors of the ambulatory. Yawning, she goes about unstrapping various planters, setting them up to be perused. This goes on for a while. During pre-show, deploying a storefront takes time and care. The birds chirp and caw and heckle. When the performance is ready to begin, and there's actually a footnote here that says, if you've got a pre-show announcement, Fade can work behind. No one wants to sit in silence watching an actor set up the stage. My dream is that you've managed to gather enough plants that Fade can be setting up for the duration of house open. So this is literally supposed to be like scenery, right? Like when you go to the theater and you're waiting for the performance to begin. If you're a theater person, if you're not that interested in theatrics as an art and practice, you may not look that much at the scenery. But if you're a theater person, you look at the scenery and you say, oh, that's a nice little touch, or whatever it is. There, Keyes, I couldn't remember her last name for just a second there. Keyes is envisioning Fade's unpacking of this ambulance as basically that kind of opening set dressing, that just you're looking at something on stage. But then Fade says, "Welcome to Dr. Voynich and her children. This story contains sexual content and discusses abortion in great detail. Should you need to leave at any time, the exits are there and there. Oh, I'm supposed to tell you, turn off your phones. You never know who could be listening." And so that's actually a thing that does come up later, that Rue does not want to discuss potentially doing an abortion, even acknowledging that abortions might exist, while Hannah, who's the young girl who comes needing an abortion, while Hannah has her phone. And so Rue actually turns on the radio and turns it up, and they have the conversation with the radio on to hide what they're talking about in case the police are listening in on Hannah's phone. Now, so we have Hannah and we have Jess. Jess is Hannah's mother. They are somewhat estranged because Jess doesn't seem to be able to conceptualize that Hannah is her own person apart from Jess's own perceived mistakes. And so that causes a lot of tension. There's also the fact that Hannah is keeping a rather significant secret from her mother, a couple of rather significant secrets. One, that she is pregnant and not married, not even dating the guy that she is pregnant by. Two, that she is, at the very least, bisexual. Three, that she wants an abortion. And four, that she actually gets an abortion. All of which is pretty much illegal in Heartland. So Hannah, very understandably, is not that keen on telling her mom about all of these things. What we find out, and I think this is actually one of the big lessons of Dr. Voynich and her children, and this is, of course, the reality of the world, is that even though Heartland has criminalized abortion, drugs, being LGBT, etc., etc., those things don't stop. And this is the problem that conservatives have in the US, is that if the goal is simply to penalize people, then that's doable. You can penalize people for getting an abortion. You can penalize people for doing drugs. You can penalize people for being LGBT. You shouldn't. It's a fucked up, terrible thing to do. You're bad human beings if that's your goal, but you can do that. What you can't do is stop people from getting, needing, seeking abortions. You can't stop people from being LGBT. You can't stop people from engaging in same-sex sexual activity. You can't stop people from being gender fluid or genderqueer or gender non-conforming or trans or non-binary or whatever it is. You can't stop people from doing drugs. Criminalizing it will not stop it. And this is one of the things that we see in Dr. Voynich and her children. The sheriff of this town, Harrison, she's a lesbian. She's not out because it's illegal. She would be in prison if it was known that she's a lesbian, but she and Rue have an illicit lesbian relationship, and that's part of the reason why Harrison lets Rue and Fade come and set up their stand and sell people these herbal medicines that are technically illegal. And so this is one of the big things, ultimately, at the end of the day, is that you can't stop people from doing things that the right wing wants them to stop doing, or to stop being, in some cases, being LGBT. You can't criminalize that out of existence. You can penalize people, you can force people into the closet, but all that does is create suffering. It doesn't actually stop them from being who they are. But we see this played out very dramatically toward the end of the play, because Fade gives Hannah an abortion. She gives her a medical, or a mechanical abortion, I guess might be the right term. Rue does agree to give her some, abortifactory, I think is the word, an herbal cocktail that theoretically can induce abortions, but both Rue and Fade think that Hannah is probably too far along for that really to be successful. Hannah is desperate, and she and Fade, they're mutually attracted to one another. They do have sex. Actually, that's an interesting bit, because the subject, the scene description is just they have sex, but there's a footnote, and this is a footnote that says, "I'm not going to tell you how to stage this. Hire an intimacy director if you can. This is a collaborative, consent-based process between director and actors. Fade to black, show some skin, make it a dance that rhymes with Rue and Jess's slow dance from earlier, make it contact improv, is as poetic or as dusty as the rest of your world." And so that element of, I'm not going to tell you how to stage this, hire an intimacy coordinator, this should be a consent-based collaborative process, that's a thing that I'm increasingly seeing with trans playwrights, LGBT playwrights, female playwrights in particular, because of the Me Too movement drawing so much attention to sexual harassment and even non-harassment issues in which performers are put in positions where they have to be physically intimate with other people that they may or may not want to do. Increasingly, I think playwrights are becoming aware of this as a problem and aware that there are things we can do as writers. There are things we can put into our plays, into our sort of peripheral material to help try and minimize the discomfort of that and the coercion that sometimes goes with that. So Fade manages to figure out how to do a mechanical abortion with a coat hanger, very old school, very dangerous. The kind of abortions that continue to happen when you criminalize abortion, because you don't actually cut down on the number of abortions. And that's data-based. Jess contacts Harrison. So Hannah's mother contacts the sheriff, and basically they set up a sting operation where Jess wears a wire and she goes and accuses Fade of murdering her daughter, essentially. They try and convince Fade that Hannah is dying and that she needs to admit what exactly they did so that the med techs can try and save her. Fade admits on recording that she gave Hannah an abortion. Harrison goes to arrest Fade, and Rue tries to save her. Rue even says into the wire that she's committed hundreds of abortions in an attempt to force Harrison either to arrest her and leave Fade alone, or to work out some sort of deal. Hannah figures out what's going on and why Harrison won't arrest Rue. Because if Harrison arrests Rue, in the course of that investigation, it will come out that Harrison and Rue had a lesbian relationship, which will destroy Harrison's position in the community, and she will be, rather than the sheriff, she will be imprisoned. Fade offers to burn their copy of the Voynich manuscript. So the Voynich manuscript, there's actually a section in here that discusses it. I'm not going to read you that section of it, but there's a reasonably lengthy section in which Fade is sort of talking through what the Voynich manuscript is to Hannah, because Fade thinks that it has information about how to do a mechanical abortion, to physically do that abortion rather than doing it herbally. Fade offers to burn their copy of the Voynich manuscript, which has all of their herbal knowledge. Now, the actual Voynich manuscript, nobody knows what it actually is. It's a weird document that's supposedly medieval, but it might be a forgery, 19th century forgery, something like that. It's likely, in parts at least, some sort of herbalist guide, but no one's 100% sure of that, and no one can read it because it's written in weird code and stuff. But Keyes, in this play, sort of supposes that it is an herbalist's guide, and that Rue and Fade are able to read it. Rue is able to read it. Fade is able to read parts of it. And there's a big argument between Rue and Fade because Fade offers to burn the manuscript on the premise that without the manuscript, they will lose knowledge, including the knowledge of how to do an abortion. And so Harrison can let them go, knowing that they won't be able to do abortions anymore. Harrison, for her part, puts on tape that she has had a lesbian relationship with Rue, so that they now each have evidence against the other. So that ensures that Harrison will let Fade and Rue go, and that Fade and Rue will not turn Harrison in. They each have evidence against the other. So they'd all end up in jail, Mexican standoff style. Yeah. Rue does not want Fade to burn the manuscript because it represents hundreds of generations of herbalist knowledge collated together in one place. But to save Rue and herself, Fade agrees to burn it. And what they ultimately end up doing, and this is an interesting thing. I actually think this is a really, really important part, because at the end of the play, we have this contrast. We find, so Hannah, Jess doesn't seem to be able to understand that Hannah is her own person who can make her own mistakes as well as her own decisions. Everything that Hannah does, Jess seems to conceptualize as her fault, as Jess's fault. Somehow her flaws, her mistakes, her bad genes, whatever it is, reflected in Hannah. But Hannah herself doesn't seem to bear any real responsibility. And what Hannah says basically to her mother is, this was my choice to make. That's actually one of her lines. It's in all caps here. She asserts, I have done these things because I wanted to do them. They are my choices, not yours. And Jess doesn't seem to really be able to come to terms with that. On the other hand, we learn that Fade is Rue's daughter or child, depending on whether or not Fade is played by a female actor or a non-binary actor. But we learn that Fade is actually Rue's child, even though Fade was sort of raised as not Rue's child. But because Fade made this decision to burn the manuscript to protect Rue and herself and Hannah, Rue gives Fade her herbalist name, Oxalis. And this is a rite of passage, because earlier in the play, Fade had wanted to do some things, and Rue had said, when you're old enough, you will get to do these things, when you are a full herbalist. So Rue has recognized Fade's decision, and that Fade's decision marks her as an adult, marks them as an adult, if they're a non-binary actor. And so we have that contrast between Jess, who seems unable to conceptualize Hannah as her own person, and Rue, who recognizes that in doing a thing that Rue absolutely categorically opposed, that Fade has shown that she is an adult, or they are an adult. And then the play ends with Hannah, who is going to go with Fade and Rue, And they're going to start rebuilding the knowledge that was lost in the burning of this Voynich manuscript. So again, one of the big lessons of this play is, yes, you can criminalize things, but that doesn't stop them. People are going to want, need, get abortions. People are going to be LGBT. People are going to use drugs. You can criminalize it, but criminalizing it is not the same as stopping it. Criminalization increases suffering without decreasing, in many cases, these behaviors, these identities, in the case of being LGBT.